Welcome to Razzball Radio on the Fantasy Sports Network for Thursday, October 9th. I'm your host, Nick Capozzi, and it's Thursday, so we got a lot to get to. Let's kick off right away with our college football expert from GoForThe2.com, Joe Lisi. Joe, welcome to Razzball Radio. How are you today, brother?
I'm doing great, Nick. It was an unbelievable weekend of college football last weekend. It's shaping up to be a great weekend this coming weekend as well.
And, man, you nailed them, including the Alabama's upset loss.
I did. I had a good week last week. I was right on. I'm hoping to be right on this week as well.
I don't know if you know this, Joe, but you've been actually pretty darn good this year. I think you're hitting like 80% with your picks, so let's get right to them. First game we're going to talk about is number 2 Auburn, 5-0. Head down to Mississippi State to take on Dak Prescott and the Bulldogs, also 5-0. Prescott's got 13 touchdowns in the air, 6 more on the ground. We've got another upset brewing here for the Bulldogs?
Possibly, but when you look at the numbers, Nick, Auburn's 4-1 since 2009 against Mississippi State by an average margin of victory of 9.7 points per game. Dak Prescott had an unbelievable performance last week against Texas A&M, 2 touchdowns through the air, 3 on the ground, had a great performance in spreading the ball around to different receivers. But when you look at the flip side with Auburn, they have a great quarterback as well, very dynamic quarterback in Nick Marshall. 4 touchdowns last week, 2 through the air, another 2 on the ground. And when you look at that Mississippi State defense, giving up 328 passing yards per game, you look at Auburn's big play wide receivers as Sammy Coates and Deshaun Williams. I think their ability to stretch the field is the difference. I think Auburn gets the victory in Starkville.
All right, here we go. The upset makers, number 3, Ole Miss Rebels, 5-0. Head to College Station, take on number 14, Texas A&M, 5-1. Big upset, obviously, for the Rebels last week, but the SEC West is hardly sewn up for them. How are they going to do against A&M?
A lot of people expecting a letdown on the road in College Station. I like this team of Ole Miss led by that quarterback, Bo Wallace. You look at his performance last week, 18 of 31, 251 passing yards, all 3 touchdowns coming in the second half. This is a veteran team that held Alabama in check last week defensively. They held Blake Sims to only 228 passing yards when Alabama is averaging 335 passing yards through the air, and held that rushing attack that was averaging 222 rushing yards per game to only 168. They held Amari Cooper, their big play wide receiver, in check. 9 receptions, 91 yards. I like Ole Miss on the road and Bo Wallace. Bo Wallace is a senior. I think he handles the pressure. Hugh Freeze and the Ole Miss Rebels get the victory on the road in College Station.
Interesting. Yeah, Ole Miss, fun team to watch this year. The Oregon Ducks, usually a fun team to watch, but they're seeing yellow after losing to Arizona last week. They're number 12 in the nation, 4-1. Head to UCLA to take on the 18th-ranked Bruins. Who you like in that game?
Well, both of these teams have offensive line issues. You look at Oregon last week. Arizona sacked Marcus Mariota 5 times. You look at Brett Hundley on the other side. He was sacked 10 times last week in the loss to Utah. UCLA, their offensive line gave up 23 sacks through 5 games, Nick. But when you look at statistics, the visitor in the series is 1-6 overall since 2006. I like UCLA at home because of their opportunistic defense. They score off their turnovers. And you look at their head coach in Jim Mora, he's a great game planner. I think he finds a way to have the right game plan in place to knock off the Ducks. I'm not sold with Oregon on the road outside of Autzen Stadium. I think UCLA picks up the victory on Saturday.
Interesting. Okay, that'll be a good game to watch. Another good game is the number 13 Georgia Bulldogs, 4-1, headed to Mizzou to take on the 4-1 Tigers. Tough road schedule coming up for the Dogs. They got to win this one if they want a shot. How are they going to do in Columbia?
Well, this was a game last year that Missouri knocked off Georgia in Athens, but Georgia's offensive line, very, very strong. They're averaging 288 rushing yards per game, and they have Heisman Trophy candidate Todd Gurley back there and freshman Nick Chubb. I think that's the difference. When you look at Missouri's defense, they're giving up about 143 rushing yards per game. They're very fast off the edge in terms of pass rush, but man up in terms of run support. I like Georgia's offensive line in this matchup, and couple that with wide receiver Malcolm Mitchell, who was out all season with an injury, came back last week. He only had 1 reception for 11 yards, but I think he'll be utilized in the passing attack, give some depth to the wide receivers and help out Hudson Mason, I think Georgia gets a convincing road victory on Saturday.
All right, usually when we talk about the Big 12, the big matchup there is Texas, Oklahoma, but right now it's not. This week it's going to be number 9 TCU 4-0 heading to Baylor to take on the number 3 ranked Baylor Bears 5-0. Who do you like?
Well, TCU dominated victory at home against Oklahoma. Trev Boykin, 318 passing yards, another 77 on the ground. But you look at the flip side, Baylor, very solid performance on the road last week in Austin. Bryce Petty, their quarterback, 7 of 22 for only 111 yards. Didn't really perform. They got into a blue-collar game, but they still won that game by 21 points over Texas. They now come back home. You talk about this Baylor team, they're averaging 51 points per game. That's tops in the nation. I think they have way too much offense for the TCU defense, and I think Bryce Petty and the Bears explode on Saturday for a convincing win over the Horned Frogs.
All right, if you like college football, you need to be following Joe on Twitter at @GoForTheNumber2 and GoForThe2.com, of course, is his website. Joe, we are going to start talking going forward a little bit of daily fantasy college football with my man Joe because he's so plugged in. And I actually heard a rumor you're going to be on SiriusXM Fantasy tomorrow morning, 7:50 a.m. Eastern. So if you're tuned in to SiriusXM, which you should be, all right, you want to listen to the Roto Expert guys in the morning, Joe is going to start dropping some daily fantasy college knowledge. By the way, Joe, you look good in that blue shirt, buddy.
It brings out my skin tone, Nick. That's why I like the blues. So anything, college football, talking with you Thursday morning, it doesn't get better than this, does it?
Well, it could if we were actually together, having a coffee, maybe some bacon and eggs. I could do that. But all right, Joe Lisi again from GoForThe2.com. Catch him tomorrow morning, SiriusXM Fantasy. This is Razzball right on the Fantasy Sports Network. We'll be right back. We're going to talk some daily fantasy and preview the Thursday night game with Nick Reducanu of Project Roto. Welcome back, Razzball Radio on the Fantasy Sports Network. I'm your host, Nick Capozzi. I am joined now by the other Nick Reducanu of ProjectRoto.com. Nick, thanks for joining us today.
Of course, man. My pleasure.
Hey, look, we got some fantasy football stuff to get to. We got some Thursday night stuff to get to and some daily. So we got a lot of stuff. So that's a lot of stuff. So let's get to it. First off, the Bengals website is suggesting that A.J. Green's recurring toe injury is going to cost them multiple games. Now, when we did the tour this year, we had some really bold predictions by some people. One of them was Ryan Hodge, of course, of Project Roto, saying that Bishop Sankey should be a third rounder. We're not even going to talk about that right now. But another one was Chris Heil, also of Project Roto, saying that Mohamed Sanu was actually going to out-touchdown A.J. Green. Now, right now, it's tied 2-2, so it doesn't look crazy. I don't think he was factoring in the injury.
Sure.
But this is bad news for A.J. Green owners.
Yeah, I think, anytime if you're a player that's a little bit dependent on your feet, which Green is, having a toe injury is never good. And we've seen this with Calvin Johnson over the years. We've seen it with Antonio Gates multiple years where he had that plantar fasciitis. Yeah, it's not good. I own Green on many teams. I'm curious what I'm going to do with him this week. And as you mentioned, I think Sanu's the guy that jumps in and gains a ton of value because Marvin Jones is out now too. And from what I read this morning, it doesn't sound like he's all that ready to return. So you'll have at least one game, it sounds like, of Sanu being really the only guy, I guess. We'll see what happens with Gresham there, too. But this might be great news for Bernard and Hill owners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think Sanu gets enough credit. I mean, this is a guy who's really talented. There was always the expectation that he could develop into a top-flight wide receiver, and I think he's doing it right now. He's just not getting the credit he deserves. So hopefully this will be a breakout show for him. Excuse me. Speaking of breakout shows, Gus Bradley, head coach of the Jaguars. I don't know if you've noticed this, Nick. Toby Gerhart has been awful. He's on pace for less than 400 yards rushing for the year. So Storm Johnson's going to get a go, and actually Gus Bradley's saying he's going to get a lot of opportunity versus Tennessee. He's an interesting guy. He's not super fast, but he's a very smooth, fluid runner. I actually tried to grab him in a couple leagues yesterday. I wasn't able to. What are your thoughts on Storm Johnson?
Yeah, it's funny. I just, maybe about 5 minutes before I came on with you, grabbed him in one of my big money leagues. So I'm
always working.
Yeah, I'm thinking about starting him this week in the flex spot just because I had to put in a wide receiver in or Michael Floyd in for Green, or I'm probably going to have to. So, yeah, I'm rolling with him. Tennessee's not a horrible run defense. I mean, they're actually towards sort of the middle of the pack, but they're a team that can obviously be run on. They had a big game they led up to Gio Bernard and Jeremy Hill. So, yeah, I don't like to trust these shiny new pennies. I don't know if I like to trust the coach speak all that much, but with bye weeks and with the amount of injuries that are going on right now, I think he's probably a decent play this week.
You know what? You mentioned Michael Floyd there. Now, I didn't have Floyd in my notes today, but he's a guy that this year I was all in on, and I have on almost every team. I've got Michael Floyd.
Too.
So I made a decision this week, and it was really difficult. But Drew Stanton now is making me nuts. So until Carson Palmer is back, I'm sitting Michael Floyd because the targets are there, but it's so interesting if you actually kind of go into the numbers. His targets are consistent, but the receptions are so up and down, and it just shows that Stanton can't get the ball in. Are you sitting Michael Floyd?
I'm kind of waiting on Palmer. I haven't seen a definitive yes or no on him. In the league I just talked about, I have to because Cordero Patterson's my other option, and I don't trust him as far as I can throw him, which isn't very far. But yeah, I mean, Floyd's one of those downfield targets, and that's not Stanton's game. It is Palmer's game though. So as long as Palmer comes back, you feel a lot better about him. He's on Floyd, I should say, is one on these like weird every other game pace where he's had 119 yards, then 19 yards. He's had 114 yards and then 7 yards. So maybe this week is every other game good game. But yeah, I mean, I think as long as Palmer comes back, I feel a lot better about him. And crazily enough, it's been better to own Malcolm Floyd than Michael Floyd so far this year.
That's been bananas. And again, I don't think it's Floyd's fault. I don't think it's the coaching staff's fault. It's just been the quarterback situation. And until I see Carson Palmer get a game under his belt, because this is again a nerve injury in the shoulder. So
sure. Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah, it's scary because you don't know how long it's going to take to regenerate. So right now, as far as I'm concerned, I'm sitting Michael Floyd. Here's another guy I'm sitting, and this guy, he's just making me angry. I don't like being angry when I do this show.
You're just going to hate bench him?
Pardon me?
You're just going to hate bench him just because?
I'm hate benching CJ Spiller because this guy is so frustrating.
Yeah.
43 yards per game on the ground, 3.5 average, no rushing TDs. You can't start him right now.
You probably can't. I look at the Patriots, and again, I'm a Patriots fan, so I watch them a little bit more than most people, I guess. But if you look at that Patriots team, they had that first game where they let up a ton of rushing yards to Noshawn Moreno. They had that game against the Chiefs where they let up a ton of rushing yards to Charles. But they've been pretty good other than that. They held the Vikings to 43 yards rushing, Oakland under 70, Cincinnati under 70. So it really depends on how the Patriots come out this week. If they can get ahead, I think Spiller is not going to do a whole lot. But if the Patriots come out sluggish like they have, let's say 3 or 4 times this year, I think you could see Buffalo give the ball to Spiller a little bit, especially in space. The Patriots linebackers aren't the fastest in the league. So I kind of like his matchup, sort of, on paper. But, if the Patriots come out like they did last week, I don't think the Bills are going to be running a whole lot. So, yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think he's one of those guys you have to just sit and sort of wait for a prove it to me game. But, yeah, it's funny that you say that. A lot of people are getting into that hate benching mode where, they're like, I'm just not playing this guy because I'm sick of watching him do nothing. So
hate benching. First time I heard that.
It's an interesting psychology, I guess, and I don't really blame you, for the most part there.
All right, so speaking of the Patriots, I was shocked this week when I looked at the injury reports that came out the other day because Gronk wasn't listed on the injury report. And I said, "What? No. What's happening here? This is not right."
I know, it's pretty crazy. It's one of I haven't actually seen that report yet, but is Brady on that report as probable with a shoulder injury? Because I'd be shocked if he's not.
You know what? I'd have to go back and double check, but just the fact that Gronk wasn't listed just floored me. I mean, so is he as healthy as he's going to be this season?
It sounds like it. He's been running for a couple of weeks now, like he's been on roller skates or something like that. He's been very cautious. He's been very un-Gronk-like in terms of initiating contact. But if you look at I think it was the fourth quarter of that Chiefs game when Garoppolo was in and he caught that touchdown, he initiated contact and he ran through 2 or 3 guys for the touchdown. And then he did the same thing last week. So, yeah, I think just watching him and listening to some of his post-game comments, it sounds like he's back. And, with such a slow start, it's pretty easy to forget that he's a top 8 tight end right now, or top 7 actually, that is. So he's got for a slow start, he's actually done pretty well. He's got 4 touchdowns already, and outside of Julius Thomas and Antonio Gates, that's as good as you get at tight end.
Julius Thomas, we're going to talk about him when we come back right after this. Talk a little bit of daily fantasy and preview a Thursday night game. I'm Nick Capozzi. This is Razzball Radio on the Fantasy Sports Network. Welcome back, Razzball Radio Fantasy Sports Network. I'm your host, Nick Capozzi. You can follow me on Twitter at Nick Capozzi, NickCapozzi. He is Nick Raducanu of ProjectRoto.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Project Roto. Pretty easy to remember. Let's talk the Thursday night game here, Nick, real quick. The Indianapolis Colts -3 points at Houston. Here's, I think, the most interesting thing, and I don't think people on the surface are going to look at this, especially with Indianapolis being a road dog here. Number one offense in the NFL, the Colts. Number one passing offense in the NFL, the Colts. Houston, number 7 defense overall, but 25th against the pass. I kind of like the Colts tonight. Anything in particular you're going to be watching in this game?
Yeah, I like the Colts too. And you forgot number 1 fantasy quarterback, Andrew Luck, crazily enough. But yeah, I mean, I think one thing I'll be looking for is a guy that took a flyer on him on probably too many leagues to see what Trent Richardson will do. He's been okay lately. If you look at the first couple games, people kind of bag on the Alabama running backs. He was doing better than Lacey for the first couple weeks, and obviously Lacey reversed that last week. But yeah, I'll be interested to see what he does against a pretty tough Texans run defense. They've been letting up some yards, especially the last week and a couple weeks ago against the Giants. But I'll be interested to see how they break out the Bradshaw Richardson carries. I'll be interested also to see if the Colts can keep up that high-flying passing attack, because they're not that kind of offense. I know, or they don't want to be. So I'm a little bit surprised actually to see them throwing so much. In Luck have so many yards. I don't think he hit 4,000 last year. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that offense morphs, or they want to morph it into more of a balanced rushing attack than a passing attack. So we'll see how that goes. I'm also looking at that. It's hard to single out 2 players on offense and defense, but I'll be looking at that Luck JJ Watt matchup. I know Luck has talked about wanting to see where Watt is on every play, so it'll be interesting to see how those 2 guys match up today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a really exciting game. Great Thursday night matchup. I kind of like the Colts -3 in this one. So
I do too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk a little bit of daily fantasy. Of course, if you're not playing daily fantasy yet, you should go to DraftKings.com, enter promo code Razzball and signing up to get a first-time deposit match and an entry into the weekly games. All right, let's talk quickly with some quarterbacks here. So Peyton Manning, the most expensive quarterback this year, $9,400 out of your $50,000 salary cap at DraftKings.com. 2 guys I like. One, Cutler, $8,000 in Atlanta. Atlanta's given up the 3rd most yards in the NFL, 26 versus the pass. I know they're playing at home, but still, like Cutler in that matchup. Here's the one I really like, though. Kyle Orton, $6,000 when New England comes to Buffalo. And I think New England, they play like they did the other night. I think Buffalo is going to have a tough matchup here. But I think just Orton, the passes he was making, that pass to Goodwin at the end of the game, those are passes Manuel wouldn't have made. And there's more skill position talent there than people realize. It's just been stalled because of Manuel. What do you think about Orton against the Patriots?
I'm really curious about this game. First of all, on the fan side, just because I'm curious to see how the Patriots bounce back, or not bounce back, but kind of try to keep that momentum. Like if they come out and look like they did in that Chiefs game, all the stuff we said after that Bengals game is out the window. I mean, we're back into full panic mode. So there's that. But I'm also interested to see how Orton can take advantage of what the Patriots do on defense, because they've been very committed to not letting the deep ball happen this year. They just don't want to get burned. So they've been giving up those intermediary kind of slant routes and whatnot. So that's not EJ Manuel's strength. I'd like the Patriots a lot more in this game if Manuel was starting, and I think Orton probably can take advantage of that, to your point. So yeah, I mean, I think with guys like Watkins and Goodwin and even Jackson and Spiller, I think it'll be interesting to see how they use those guys in the intermediary routes rather than those downfield routes. And keep an eye on one guy. I don't even know if he's healthy, to be honest with you, so this could sound stupid, but keep an eye on Scott Chandler. He's actually burned the Patriots a lot over the last couple of years, and that's a weird BVP type thing for all you baseball guys, and maybe you don't believe in it, but he's done really well against the Patriots over the years.
Well, you never know. Some guys just get jacked up for certain teams.
Sure.
Talking running backs now. Matt Forte, the most expensive, $8,800 in Atlanta. I don't even mind that play again because of how porous their defense has been.
I'll pay up for him.
But here's 2 guys I like. I like LaShawn McCoy, who kind of it wasn't a breakout game, but they're starting to get some of those offensive linemen back in Philadelphia, which is the real issue there with McCoy. $6,000 versus the Giants. But the one I really like is Andre Ellington, $5,100 against the middle-of-the-pack Washington defense, or a run defense in particular. You like either of those guys?
Yeah, I love both of those. I like that first pick of Forte too. I mean, the Falcons have given up 9 rushing touchdowns, which is a good 4 over the rest of the league. Yeah, I like McCoy. I mean, if you can get McCoy $2,000 cheaper than Forte, I think that's a great value play. And yeah, Ellington against the Redskins I think, is a nice play as well. The Redskins have been pretty decent actually against the run this year, but at the same time, they've been a little bit worse over their last two games, and they just seem like one of those teams that's about to get into a tailspin, and things are going to go really badly pretty quickly. So. For Redskins fans, I hope I'm wrong there, but yeah, I think that's a nice play at that price.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering now. Actually, does St. Louis still have Washington's first round pick from next year as well from that RG3 trade? I think they might, because I could see them going into a tailspin. All right, a couple more DFS plays. Let me just bang through some quick. You can tell me which one you like in particular. Some plays I like: Julio Jones, $8,400 versus Chicago, because I think Atlanta's going to be throwing a lot in that game. Odell Beckham didn't really break out, 4 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown last week, but I like him against the third worst Eagles pass defense, $4,200. Julius Thomas, $6,700. You got to play him versus the Jets only because he's got 7 TDs. Their secondary hasn't been great. But if you are looking for value at tight end, Larry Donnell, $3,500 versus the Eagles. And here's my sleeper D of the week: Jags, $2,600 at Tennessee. If Whitehurst is in there, the Jags have been playing good the last couple of games. I feel like a Jags homer. I'm not even from Jacksonville, but they've been playing surprisingly good. Give me one of those plays. We got about 35 seconds here, Nick, that you like: Julio, Odell, Julius Thomas, Larry Donnell, or the Jags.
I like Beckham. I think he's one of those guys. They drafted him pretty high, and higher than a lot of people thought they should. I think the Giants are gonna be really committed to getting him the ball. I think him and Eli. Over the next couple of games, we'll develop a little bit more of a relationship. And for whatever reason, it seems like Ruben Randall, as much as everybody wants to love him and his tons of red zone targets, just can't put it together. I mean, he's one of those guys where you look at his stats and you're like, man, that guy should be a top 20 wide receiver, and he just never does. But to go back to your Jacksonville play real quick, I know we got to go. I like Delanie Walker against the Jaguars. Sometimes it's tough to say things carry over from year to year. Well, one thing that's carried over is the Jacksonville Jaguars cannot guard tight ends. They've given up 5 touchdowns to tight ends this year. It's still happening. Walker's a good play this week against the Jaguars, and Charlie Whitehurst, all he does is throw touchdowns.
There you go. All right, Nick Raducanu from Project Roto. Follow him on Twitter at Project Roto. We'll be back tomorrow with Sky. Will give us the things we're observing this weekend as well as start sits. This is Razzball Radio Fantasy Sports Network. Thanks for joining us, Nick.